The plague is one of the most infamous diseases in human history, responsible for the death of tens of millions of people throughout the Middle Ages and even today. But did you know that this horrifying disease actually started out by attacking rats? And no, this isn't some weird rat-human hybrid animal conspiracy theory. It was actually the rats that helped the plague get from Asia to Europe and then spread it all over the place. This includes right here in the good old United States. In fact, we have these little guys to thank for the second deadliest pandemic in history, which killed around 20 million people in India alone. We also have them to thank for the Black Death, which wiped out half of all Europeans in the 14th century. So how did rats help the plague spread? What kind of damage does it do to the human body? And finally, how can we defend ourselves against this horrible illness? If you want to find out, stay with me till the end of the video. Rats are one of the most common animals in the world, living just about everywhere humans do, whether we want them to or not. They're small, quick, agile, and they reproduce at a rate of about 190 rats per year. In other words, they're basically the perfect vehicle for disease transmission. And sure enough, rats were the first known victims of the plague, carrying it from its point of origin in Asia all the way to the European continent. It's theorized that black rats were the primary carriers because they lived in close proximity with humans, and their fleas were resistant to the usual repellents used at the time. It's also, since black rats prefer living in close quarters, they were able to pass the disease back and forth until they became a walking, scurrying vessel of disease. Once they made it to port cities like Florence and Sicily, the plague quickly jumped from rats to humans, because black rats prefer living in close quarters. They were able to pass the disease back and forth until they became a walking, scurrying vessel of disease. Once they made it to port cities like Florence and Sicily, the plague quickly jumped from rats to humans, and there was nothing that people could do to stop it. While the bubonic plague is often called the Black Death, the truth is that only a small percentage of plague victims actually turned black. Victims who didn't die from the plague, but recovered left behind telltale signs of their infection. Symptoms included a high fever, weakness, chills, headache, nausea and vomiting, painful lymph node swelling, and ulcers on the skin. These symptoms, if you can imagine, are only the tip of the iceberg. When someone is infected with the plague, the bacteria enters their bloodstream and makes its way to the lymph nodes, where it begins to multiply. At this stage, the person will feel flu-like symptoms such as a fever, weakness, chills, headache, nausea, and vomiting, but the worst is yet to come. As the bacteria continues to multiply, the lymph nodes become swollen and painful. These swellings are called buboes, hence the name bubonic plague. The buboes are filled with pus and blood and can grow to be quite large. The person may also develop ulcers on their skin, particularly on the legs. As the plague progresses, the bacteria can spread to other parts of the body, such as the lungs. This can cause pneumonia, which can be just as deadly as the bubonic plague. In fact, the pneumonic plague is even more contagious than the bubonic plague. When a person with the pneumonic plague coughs or sneezes, the bacteria is released into the air and can be inhaled by others. This is how the plague was able to spread so quickly throughout Asia and Europe. So what happens when the bacteria reaches your lungs? Well, you can imagine it's pretty bad. The person will experience difficulty breathing, chest pain, and coughing up blood. The bacteria is so damaging to the lungs that it can cause them to fill with fluid and blood. In other words, death is inevitable. Unfortunately, there is no cure for the plague. The best hope for treatment is antibiotics, but even those don't always work. So what are the chances that you'll contract the plague? Well, don't worry too much. It's relatively rare nowadays, but not unheard of. There are only about 1,000 cases reported each year, mostly in Africa, Asia, and the United States. Most of these cases are of the bubonic variety, which is the most common form of the disease. Of course, it's still possible to contract the pneumonic plague, which is much more deadly. In the United States, the plague is most common in the western states, particularly California, where it's mostly transmitted by wild rodents. Cases are also common in the southwestern states, including Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. If you're bitten by an infected flea, you may develop the plague. It's also possible to contract the plague by handling an infected animal or its carcass. This is more common in people who work in animal processing plants or who hunt and eat wild game. If you do contract the plague, it's important to seek medical attention immediately. Antibiotics are the best chance for survival, but they must be given early. If you wait too long to seek treatment, the bacteria can spread and cause organ failure. Death is a real possibility, but it's not certain. With prompt medical attention, many people who contract the plague survive. And it's not just rats that transmit the plague. While rats are the most common carriers, they're not the only ones. In fact, the plague is transmitted by a number of different animals, including squirrels, prairie dogs, chipmunks, groundhogs, and marmots. These animals are usually infected by fleas that have fed on infected rodents. So while you might not see a rat, you could still contract the plague if you're bitten by an infected flea. It's not only wild animals that can carry the plague. Domestic animals such as cats, dogs, and livestock can also be infected. However, it's much less common for these animals to carry the disease.
Most cases of plague in domestic animals
Occur in cats that have been exposed to infected rodents. Dogs can also contract the plague by eating infected rodents or their carcasses. You've probably heard stories of the plague killing people left and right, especially during the Middle Ages. And it's true that the plague has killed millions of people throughout history. However, it's not as common nowadays thanks to advances in medical science. That being said, it's still possible to die from the plague, especially if you don't seek treatment promptly. The bacteria that causes the plague is highly contagious and can easily spread to other people. This means that if you don't take steps to prevent the spread of the disease, you could easily infect someone else and potentially kill them. That's why it's important to seek medical attention right away if you think you might have the plague. Early treatment with antibiotics can save your life and prevent the spread of the disease to others. So don't worry too much about contracting the plague. It's relatively rare nowadays, but it is possible. Just take steps to prevent the spread of the disease and seek medical attention right away if you think you might have it. What about prevention? Is there anything you can do to protect yourself from the plague? The good news is that there are a few simple things you can do to reduce your risk of contracting the plague. First, avoid contact with sick or dead animals, especially rodents. If you do come into contact with a sick or dead animal, wash your hands thoroughly with soap and water. Also, wear insect repellent when you're outdoors. This will help keep fleas and ticks away, which can carry the plague. Finally, be sure to vaccinate your pets against the plague. Your vet can advise you on the best course of action. Alright, that's a wrap. Do you know anyone who's contracted the plague? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And please share this video with friends and family so that they can learn how to protect themselves against the plague. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more informative videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.